We have started a new conversation series to accompany Red Thread Journal's 5th edition. Red Thread is our slow and infrequent publishing platform since it was initiated by VHV and Osman Kavala in 2009 as part of the 11th Istanbul Biennial. Red Thread is envisioned as an active network and platform for exchange of knowledge and collaboration of artists, curators, social scientists, theorists, and cultural operators from the Balkans, Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. We are meeting with some of the contributors of the 5th issue and reflect upon their articles or interventions. Also, by doing so, we wish to place our theoretical approaches to real time and place. Today, we are together with Ahmet Ersoy, who contributed to our issue with his article Neo-Ottomanism in the Age of Digital Media. Ahmet Ersoy is Associate Professor at the History Department at Boğaziçi University, Istanbul. His work deals with the history of the late Ottoman Empire, with a special focus on the changing role and status of visual culture during a period of westernizing change. He is the author of Architecture and the Late Ottoman Historical Imaginary, Reconfiguring the Architectural Past in the Modernizing Empire. Ersoy's recent research involves a study of photography and other means of mechanical image reproduction in the late Ottoman world. He aims to understand the broader impact of this new media regime in the context of Ottoman culture, with particular focus on the intertwined histories of photography and print culture. So Ahmet, welcome. I just want to start by asking, how have you been? How this pandemic affected you, your engagements, your life?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. So it's this big "how are you holding up" question that we have to start with. Well, I can't complain because I'm not a health worker. I'm not working in a factory or a sweatshop, and obviously, I had the privilege and luxury to be isolated. But whether or not this isolation led to a kind of very productive period is a big question. I don't think I've been that productive. I think the major problem was for me, I mean personally, this is very personal, of course, was the absence of real life references, these very physical, visceral, embodied kind of constraints and points of reference that shape our lives on a daily basis, these both spatial and temporal kind of references, like being in the classroom, visiting the cafeteria, going out to the street, and all of these kinds of organized, preordained, and unorganized, unregulated aspects of life, with all kinds of serendipities involved. So without these references, I think I kind of found myself in this primeval soup kind of atmosphere where there's constantly this indefinite sense of time and space. So I found it difficult to organize my working time. Leisure time gets entangled in work time. Saturday night at 11, I get this email from somebody at the registrar who's asking for some kind of information. Because everybody's working from home, nobody has any limits, in terms of leisure time and working time. It has been quite a challenge to care for the elderly, and it was very kind of interesting to see how what sensory deprivation does to people. The lack of social human contact, the inability to touch people, to engage with them emotionally or physically or socially. And you see how, especially with the elderly population, where as you know, in Turkey, the measures were really draconian, particularly in terms of the elderly population. And you see in the absence of all of these stimuli that involve our sensorium, how fast and how radical the decline of aging can hit you. So this was, I think, one of the eye openers, and I think there was a lot of collateral non-COVID type of damage. A lot of people died from that generation. Just, I think, particularly because of this constant estrangement and isolation that affects your system. So, in general, I can talk about, I can, underline this process of both social, personal, and professional de-skilling that has affected all of us. So I feel that in this sense, in this whole environment of de-skilling and deprofessionalization and isolation, estrangement, I think that the pandemic was kind of a rehearsal. It's something that kind of portends or foreshadows a dark possible future, a worst case scenario where the entirety of our lives are colonized by these networked, reticulated, commercialized systems of social and professional engagement that are embedded within these commercialized networks, where the very pattern, the very rhythm of our lives, the very texture of our sensory perception is mediated by digitized media. It's I think it's a kind of state of being that affects your consciousness, that affects your sensorium, your memory, where there is the effect is an acute sense of loneliness. No matter how constantly communicating you are, no matter how you have this sense of absolute availability of services and needs, there's this constant individual gratification in the cyber universe, but nevertheless, the feeling that it leaves in your palate is that of loneliness.
Mm-hmm. I mean, actually, that was my some part of my first question, because in your article you write about the complex machinery of capitalism that generates constant serialized stimuli and various versions of instant reality, and this able to penetrate deep into our psyche and to subjugate us as subjects. This was an article written before the pandemic, but revisiting it now opens up many new perspectives. Now we have an extended online life, a standardized digital information habitat, which has some advantages, connecting with the whole world, but also creates an enormous alienation. So what is your take on it? Like, you already started, but how do you see our new digital normal?
Yeah, okay. So a series of complaints about online learning is what I'm going to give you. I don't enjoy it at all, not the least bit. But obviously it's here to stay, I guess, at least to a certain extent, because the tech industry needs constant growing and investment, and the education sector is I think one of the targets right now. But in terms of my more personal experience with online learning, you of course, obviously, I mean, it gives you all of these alternative resources for connection, engagement, and stimuli through digital resources, and these are, of course, commercialized resources. So they're bound to produce endless novelty. It has to be novelty, one novelty after the other. And all to compensate for this experience of real contact that we have in our regular teaching environment. How do I feel, facing all of these new kind of media of engagement, academic engagement? I feel lonely and fragmented. Is, I think, what I can say. because I think, this online teaching, it like fragments a very textured, dense, rich, and collective zone of experience that we call the classroom, into these fabricated micro worlds, and these micro worlds, this environment, I think, is very debilitating in terms of destroying the singularity and uniqueness of the classroom experience, because it replaces it with these simulated environment symbols, predetermined tasks. It's very task oriented, that are supposed to displace the classroom experience, but it also brings forward a completely new attention economy. So, before the semester, we had all of these workshops and webinars and orientations about Zoom, for instance. But, what's interesting is that nobody is really that interested in content, in the, very texture and ambiguity of knowledge, the kind of knowledge that we are trying to engage with in our teaching. All that we concentrate on is these machinic tasks and demands. We concentrate on these performative capabilities of the tool. There are these routines that are prescribed, and in the end, it seems like all of these routines work as ends in themselves, and you have to efficiently fulfill them. The students have to efficiently fulfill them, and it's supposed to be good for everybody. So there's this complete illusion, I think, of autonomy, freedom, and choice. But in the end, it works as an more or less auto-regulating system. Georgia Agamben, when he talks about these intelligent machines of today, he says, you use the machine and you become the instrument. You co-inhabit each other with the instrument. So it ends up, these like online teaching tools also end up, regulating your teaching kind of routine, and it destroys the singularity of place and event. The classroom is an event. It's a performative space, and the campus as well. These are small forms of sociability and contact. And when you think about the 2-hour lecture, it requires constant engagement and patience from the students. They can't be passive, and there's no corporate intrusion into this kind of routine in terms of its test. It's when I teach, I watch the class, I look at their movements and body language, and I try to figure out the course of the lecture. I think that sort of public space aspect of teaching is very important, because that's also what democracy is all about. It's about patience, it's about accommodation, it's about deference, rather than self-interest and self-gratification, thinking about others, stopping and listening to what the other is saying. In a Zoom environment, you can just shut yourself off, or shut your camera off, or pretend you froze, and you're off. There's no problem. So I think in the environment of the cyberspace, we're more prone to be polarized, more insensitive, and selfish. We clump together with our likes, in our echo chambers, and we tend to be. I guess we all experience this from our WhatsApp groups or email forums, that in the discussions we tend to be more harsh and inconsiderate, and when we face others in public space, in person, the discussion with this kind of embodied contact works in a totally different way. I think evolutionary, we're conditioned to watch, sense, smell the others, and kind of regulate our actions in terms of that unregulated kind of environment that's more open to to surprise.
Do you see any possibilities, or did you ever witness any experiments on how can we be subversive in this environment? Like the ways of hacking it or using it differently, not being tools of it, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, there is always this potential, of course. I don't mean to be pessimistic, but like I remember one of the greatest names in media studies, Friedrich Kittler, who said that in the 21st century, you know, Immanuel Kant's dictum sapere aude, dare to know, is going to be replaced by a new dictum, a new form of life that can be encapsulated with the words programmare aude, dare to program. So basically what he's proposing is that, you know, the system is very powerful, this whole networked kind of humongous whole. And if you want to be emancipated and empowered, you need to outwit, you need to be able to outwit the system by penetrating its very codes. So you have to know coding. But that, so far, what we're witnessing is that it's not that easy. I mean, it's not something that you can do personally because you know, machine learning works on the basis of quantity, and you're just engaging with the system. You're supplying data on the basis of which it gains further intelligence. And one step you take in terms of your subversive action, the system just learns it very fast and then outwits you. And you're dealing with this huge reticulated networked system that I guess would require a much more determined, organized kind of form of subversivity, the like of which we haven't seen. And maybe it's just the generational thing. Maybe it's the next generation, the digital natives, who will be able to figure out these modes of real, serious engagement. But I think, I mean, this might be too old-fashioned, but you know, I think the way in which we talk about politics, political engagement, and the way we know it, the way democracy works, the way how embodied engagement and social contact play a very important role in this, I am unable to think of a more kind of cyberspace-oriented alternative to this. Also, I think we need to consider that these connections over the cyberspace are very fragile, and they are very conducive to involvement and intrusion by hegemony. So I don't know. As I said, it's just, this beats me. Yani, I leave it to the next generation to figure this out. I hope that's the you know, good case scenario. But it's for us at least, it's a challenge. Yani, maybe something that I would like to add here is that all these, you know, networked environments of electronic exchange are, and I'm going back to the question of loneliness, but these environments are conducive to breed an organized kind of loneliness. No matter how you feel connected, no matter how you feel kind of you are within a networked group, the end result is, I think, ultimately, and COVID has showed this to us more blatantly, that there's a potential threat of organized loneliness. And I think Hannah Arendt was one of the people who was able to kind of underline this political danger of loneliness when she talked about totalitarianism. She distinguished between isolation and loneliness. And she said, isolation is fine. You read a book, you're isolated. And you need to be isolated to basically converse with yourself, to be critical. But the thing with isolation is that it's not permanent. You need it to be creative, but then you can immediately, whenever you want, get out of it. But loneliness is something that's more systemic, that can be induced by totalitarian systems, that starves your imagination, that starves pluralism, and it penetrates into your way of thinking. Your private space is invaded by these chores, by these patterns, by these, what she says, for instance, is that totalitarianism, this sense of hegemony, creates a kind of mental colonization where all you can do is straightforward logical reasoning. You have certain tasks, routines, cliches, protocols. You know what's expected from you. You operate within the system, you're fine. But beyond this, you can't move. And as long as you can't move beyond these very debilitating, actually, constraints, you can't be creative, neither intellectually nor politically. So I feel that, with this whole digital media environment that goads you, pushes you through these very standardized, very mass synchronized tasks and routines, we are moving in the direction of a very chronic kind of organized kind of digital loneliness. In the paper in Red Thread, I talk about, for instance, two applications, one older, Musically, and one newer, that's very topical, TikTok. And when I talk about these apps, I say that they're potentially very pluralistic and creative. You can do anything. Shoot videos, do lip syncing, whatever. But then when you look at the results, you realize that people, the participants, usually operate on the basis of predetermined templates. There are very mass synchronized ways of performing in this system, almost as if there's an institutional superego that determines your actions, and you're not able to reflect, you're not able to contemplate, you're not able to be by yourself. So your whole perceptual experience is homogenized, massified, and synchronized, and therefore your creativity is regulated and calibrated in order to create maximized profit. So this is very different from the kind of media that I experienced when I was a kid. For instance, I remember I grew up during single channel TV, Turkish radio and television, and there was just one black and white channel. And to this day, I can remember, the very days of certain programs, like the Love Boat would be Saturday evening, the Vikings, the Japanese comic cartoon series, my favorite would be Wednesday afternoons. So even in the case of this more limited media environment, you have a sense of time that is rationed. You do your homework before the Vikings, and then you have your leisure time, and then you can sort of regulate and ration your time according to this. Whereas now it's become, this whole media environment has become totally, what's the word for it? Totally homogenized, and it just covers all aspects of the fabric of your life.
Yeah.
So loneliness.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the past, so my next question was actually about, like, in the same line with this, because in your article you are not only talking about these technologies, but you are sort of using this analysis to problematize the representation of the past inviting us to rethink Benjamin's critique of the hegemonic visuality of the historical. And I wanted to ask you, as a last question, like in this framework, could you reflect a little bit about how our perception of the past is affected in this passage from printed culture to digital culture, or as you said, like one-channel TV to like all these kind of applications and providers giving us stimuli all the time?
Right. I mean, you can do. I forgot to tell the next stage. Yani the Vikings and single channel TV was our childhood. Now it's Netflix, where everything is available, and if you're working from home, you can do binge watching during the week. We're really talking about a radical difference here, and this applies to our perceptions of the past and the way we engage with historical knowledge, the way we engage with memory, I think. Now, when we think about, for instance, patterns of thought, patterns of attention, modes of looking, modes of acquiring knowledge that are shaped within the parameters of a print culture environment, the traditional, what we're more used to, what we see is that, history, the sense of the past, the way human beings deal with the past is more a product of, again, public discussion. It involves public space. It involves real communication, open communication that is open to uncertainties, that is amenable to serendipity, surprises. And it involves collective engagement, negotiation, accommodation, diplomacy, and you explore. That's why I like history. You explore. You're surprised. You can you can be totally uncertain. There's always an element of doubt in there. So it's and you can self-contradict. This is one of the things that Hannah Arendt also talks about. Thinking by yourself is dangerous because you can contradict yourself. That's why it's always more comfortable to abide by what the hegemony, what ideology is telling you, because you can think and you can be safe within those constraints. But open critical thinking, upon which we think history is based, is more dangerous, but obviously it's more fun, and it involves critical collective engagement. Now, with new modes of attention, with new modes of processing information, we are swamped with information. We're bombarded with these endless circulating fragmented images. And for a long while, actually, even Nietzsche talks about this in the end of the 1870s. I think he says, I'm sick and tired of being bombarded by information. I can't process it. I can't digest it anymore. I want time to digest and contemplate. Okay, so imagine this being said in the 1870s, and where we stand now. We're constantly, in terms of historical information, we're swamped in data trash constantly. And I think the way history is being absorbed by individuals today, you are engaged in history through spectacles, the kind of spectacles that I talk about in my article, for instance, The Conquest of Istanbul, where you have all this cutting edge technology, mesmerizing effects, and you're engrossed in this historical environment. You have videos, the kind of videos that the government is, again, in Turkey is producing about the past, our glorious Ottoman past. Games, a lot of people from the young generation are exposed to history only through games, computer games, TV shows. So all of this and this is very optically oriented as opposed to print culture, right? So it's very engaging, stimulating. But all of these media bring forward and offer us a more massified, a more standardized vision of the past that is more ephemeral, that is more assertive. It's what I'm trying to say is that the new environment is more conducive to be appropriated and exploited by authoritative powers, right? As it is happening in Turkey right now. And it just turns you, it just doesn't let you allow, with this bombardment of information, it doesn't let you be involved in a contemplative, critical relationship with history. It just shows. It constantly just shows. And you are expected to be this passive onlooker because you don't have time or means to go beyond that. You merely watch. You're a passive observer. Therefore, you receive, you abide, and you agree. That's, I think, the potential danger of our new kind of engagement with history that has been, I think, appropriated quite successfully, at least by the new regime in Turkey. And as long as we're left in this timeless, spaceless cocoon that we find ourselves, it's very difficult to engage in other more critical and collective modes of engagement with the past. I've been very pessimistic, I'm sorry, but I don't know. As I said, maybe to try to end with a more positive note, maybe it's our generational limitations that don't allow. I mean, this is a kind of critique of industrialized modernity that has been around since the beginning of the 19th century, and we're still operating with those templates. And as we observe how new technologies kind of get involved in this ongoing process, but maybe maybe we will be able to think with other kinds of paradigms, helped by other kinds of technologies that will help us see a way out of this.
Well, that's a good point to maybe finish our conversation, at least with a hopeful sentence. Thank you for spending another hour in front of Zoom for us. We appreciate your time. And thank you for the article once again. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.